Pan Pacific was kind of the epicenter of all of Expo. Like everybody who was anybody stayed there. The Sultan of Brunei, Margaret Thatcher, Dennis Thatcher, Mulrooney, all the dignitaries. I did the Nakasone Bennett Summit. There was one Canadian, which was me, and one Japanese guy that did the Japanese side. So we rehearsed for 2 days, did all that. I served Princess Di, Prince Charles. It was crazy. It was a crazy period of time. And because of who I was or what I was trained to do, I did all those head tables. You can't make mistakes, right? You're serving Mulrooney and he's looking at you with hawk eyes, and like you have to be perfect. You can't talk too much. You have to, serve the wine with one finger. Like you just have to do everything. You can't drop wine on the table. Like you just can't make mistakes. So it's easy to dumb it down, I think. So I was lucky. My start in the service industry was kind of emphatic.
That's Curtis Redel, and this is The Stories That Brought You Here, a podcast dedicated to the stories of the people living in and around the Salish Sea. I'm your host, Chris Wakaluk, and it's my pleasure to get to sit down with people to hear the pivotal and life-changing stories in their lives that brought them to the point that they're at in their lives right now. As a young boy growing up in Alberta, Curtis had his first working experience at his mom's health food store. As he entered his teens, he began working in the restaurant industry, and years of amazing experiences would follow. By his mid-20s, he decided to shift gears and began selling commercial real estate in Vancouver. This career path took on various forms for nearly 2 decades until he sought a change in his life and moved to Pender Island. It was there he opened the resort Woods on Pender. It is so interesting to me how people eventually wind up where they are and all the things that had to happen along the way in order to turn that into a reality. How did Curtis go from working at his mom's health food store to owning and operating a resort? Well, you're going to find out in this interview, and it is truly fascinating. That's coming up very shortly, but before we get started, there's something I'd like to share with you, and it's a service I'm providing to help people record their oral history. Through doing this podcast over the years and talking to numerous people, I found that the idea of recording a family member's history is something a lot of people think about, but very few actually act on it. I truly believe that everyone has stories worth preserving and wisdoms to share. So I've created an easy way for people to record a high-quality and comprehensive audio memoir for family and future generations to cherish. The process begins with preliminary interviews to become acquainted with you and your stories. Then, using professional recording equipment, comes the recording phase. And to finish it off comes some creative editing techniques to bring out the best of you and your storytelling. The final recording is all in your own voice, and it is an amazing opportunity for your descendants to get a true understanding of who you actually are, but also functions as a set of footprints for family to follow. The lessons you've learned along the way, personal reflections, life experiences, and family history. These recordings can be as long as you would like, and I'm here to help. If you would like to know more about this, you can email me at myaudiomemoir@outlook.com. That's all one word, myaudiomemoir@outlook.com. So thank you very much for listening to that. And now a little bit of music and then my interview with Curtis Redel. Curtis, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks.
For sure. So I always love giving context to what's going on for the listener. So today it's mid-February. It's kind of first thing in the morning, about 10:30. How's your day been so far?
It's great. Yeah, lots of moving parts. Prepping for March 1st reopening. So lots of roofers, excavators, deck builders, all kinds of moving parts. Got 8 more working days till reopening.
Okay. Are you going to get it done?
Oh, yeah. It'll be a scramble, but it always is.
Yeah. What time did you start with people coming to the site this morning?
9 o'clock. Got an RV guy, roofers arrived, excavators, 2 construction guys, all working, and a cooling guy coming in the afternoon, and a moss remover roof guy coming in the afternoon as well. So, yeah, 8 more days, countdown.
Okay. And then it starts the season of guests coming to the woods. Okay, well, let's jump into the first traditional question that this podcast is about, and that is, what brought you to Pender Island?
So I think it was beginning of 2014. I started thinking in Vancouver. I'd spent 25 years doing commercial real estate deals, retail rollouts, kind of got bored, like 13, 14, started thinking about transition. It was just too easy and wanted a challenge and wanted to kind of replace my day job with a project that included real estate, but also an active business that I could operate with a real estate context. So first I was looking at mini storage facilities, and I was with my family in Texas in, I guess it was April, May of 2014. They were building some mini storage facilities. So I booked myself into a New York conference in mini storage, and I sort of looked into that, and I thought, this is really boring. And I'd grown up in the hotel business and was in it intensely, for my first 14 years old till about 20, 23 years old. So then I just gravitated to looking for resort projects. Started in North America and then narrowed it down to British Columbia. And then I looked all over BC. I looked in the Columbia Valley, spent 5 weeks looking at the Fairmont Hot Springs Resort, which was a huge project. Decided to move on from that. And then I started focusing on, Tofino, Gulf Islands, and then eventually started looking at properties. So probably July 2014, I flew to Pender. I looked at Browning. I looked at the Woods, the Inn on Pender. Looked at a bunch of houses. It was a day trip. So I flew in, looked at a bunch of property, flew back to Vancouver. Next weekend, I looked at Salt Springs. I started kind of narrowing it down a little bit more onto the Gulf Islands after looking at pretty much everywhere in BC. This particular property stuck in my head, Woods on Pender. And actually, within weeks, Woods on Pender was already in my vocabulary, ironically. After seeing it, it looked like a campsite. Salt Spring was the next week, and I looked at everything for sale on Salt Spring. Everything just seemed busy and expensive. And then over the course of the next few months, kept coming back to Inn on Pender, and had started negotiating. And I think by December of 14, I had a deal in place, the dryers. And then I literally all happened really quickly. I sold my condo, closed on December 29th, January 1st, moved to Pender, rented a house, and April 8th of 2015 closed and had the whole thing open by June, July. I think the restaurant opened June 6th. So it all happened really quickly. The concept, I did a video of Woods on Pender with the glamping and kind of an Ace Hotel vibe almost within weeks of seeing the property, which I started showing to my family and my friends who thought it was crazy that I would leave the city and move to the country. But it's kind of weird that literally within weeks of flying here and looking at this property, it stuck in my head, and I had done the video, and Woods on Pender was kind of a reality. And Coffee Kitchen, I was involved in a coffee chain in Vancouver as an owner. So coffee was always a component. I have always been drawn to food and beverage. So the restaurant component of this project was appealing. I'd looked at lots of other projects where there was no food and beverage. It was just cabins or whatever. But the vision was almost immediate. I had a project in Vancouver in Chinatown, and we had a parking lot that kind of wrapped around the project, and we had a rooftop that was never used. So it was non-income producing. Nobody parked there. And so the Airstream idea came from that in about 2012, 13 when we bought it. I had come up with an idea from the Granddaddy Hotel in South Africa. They did an Airstream hotel on top of a hotel, and it sort of stuck in my head. So I researched, talked to a bunch of Airstream architects. That was back in 12, 13. So that was kind of in my head when I looked at this property, and it was always a part of it. But initially I was going to build 10 cabins with 5 Airstreams. So the Airstreams are going to be one component. I was going to build out the whole property, the whole Woods on Pender property immediately. And then I couldn't get financing. So the whole thing, so the cabin idea was nixed. And then the Airstream, I went and bought them. So by January, February of 2015, I had 6 Airstreams sitting on the parking lot. Hadn't closed yet, hadn't got the deal. I still had conditions. I still hadn't got financing, but I went ahead and bought them. So very risky, but had the vision. And then we went all the way down to, I guess it was Friday. Closing was on Tuesday, which was like April 2nd or something. Friday, 3:30, coming out of a car wash in Victoria, the bank called me and said, we're not doing the deal. And I'm closing on Tuesday. So my lawyer had the closing documents. Everything was lined up. And then, so I literally had no financing. I'm closing on Tuesday. So I made a call to my family, which I would never have done. And we did a 1-week extension and wound up internally financing it and closing. So the cabins were nixed. I just did the Airstreams. And then we did the restaurant reno, started fixing up the motel, and we closed April 8th, I guess 1 week late. That was kind of the start of it all. That's how I came to Pender. So I didn't come to Pender intentionally. I just came here because of that. So I was wanting to do a project, and this was the only one in the province that made sense. And
so why did Pender specifically make sense exactly?
The deal. So it was just like, I'm a real estate guy. So almost all the resorts that I looked at across the province were based, the pricing was based on a business of a resort business. Mm-hmm. They were overpriced from a platform point of view. So the actual underlying land was double what it should be. Okay. So if the resort fails, you're basically stuck with an overpriced resort property and then having to sell it. So this was the only one that made sense as a real estate deal. So it was cheap enough and manageable enough that even with this adversity of not getting financing, having to internally finance it, scramble around at the last minute, I was still able to close it.
Yeah. So that's interesting because your place is known for the Airstreams, but it sounds like that it was almost accidental that the Airstreams became such a pivotal component of it because of the financing issue.
Yeah, initially it was going to be sort of more ace hotelish. There was going to be 10 modern 240 square foot black cabins with a cantilevered front porch with a hammock hanging and a Malm fireplace. Very crisp, modern, kind of like my bunkie cabins that we have today.
Okay.
They were going to be actual cabins, so 240 square feet, very specifically designed, built in North Vancouver, barged over. That whole plan, I mean, we went all the way down to like I spent $30,000 or $40,000 on drawings and lining up having people come over. We surveyed the property with all the cabins in place. So the whole project was based on 10 modern cabins and 5 Airstreams.
Okay.
So we did the whole site plan with everything lined up all the way through to drawing up a septic plan, power plant, like everything was all laid out all over with the topography. We literally like walked the site, measured it, sprayed red paint on the ground to kind of map out all these cabins and Airstreams. And then it just didn't happen. Like Friday, 3:30, that plan's out the window, new plans in place by the following week. Internally financed. So I mean, my family was able to give me the mortgage that I was looking to the bank to. And also the quickness, the timing of it, closing in April, opening in the summer, I wouldn't have been able to do a development permit, do all of that stuff and have it in place for that season. Airstreams didn't require a permit, a development permit or a building permit. So I was able to get it done quicker.
Yeah. I love how you're talking about the ins and outs of this experience, and like there's a lot of struggle and walls being put up, right? And then having to adjust on the fly, right? And so as you're adjusting on the fly and it looks like you're moving towards the Airstream side of things, how did that wind up evolving into what it is now, right? Because starting off with a small amount of Airstreams, what did you find from the response from your clientele about that?
I mean, I had already bought 6 Airstreams by January, February, so that portion was always in play. Mm-hmm. It was just going to have 10 cabins in addition to the 6 Airstreams. So it was a smaller lodging platform than I had originally planned, a little bit less focused, a little bit. And then the restaurant opened and it was a big focus. So it got really busy really quickly. We kind of opened like 6 days a week, long hours. So really, by the time I opened, it was really all about the restaurant for that first season up until probably September, October. That was kind of my almost 100% focus we got kind of the 5 Airstreams in place. One of them is a project. It was needed to get renovated. So the 5 were in place, plus the 3 cabins and the motel and the restaurant were in place when we opened. And then that was the start of it. Literally flying by the seat of our pants. The whole thing happened within 2 months, right? The restaurant, we closed on April 8th and the restaurant opened June 6th, and it was summer and busy. But we were, the Woods on Pender concept really wasn't evolved yet. We were still kind of in on Pender. The motel guests were still like pre-books or people that had come before. Even the restaurant, I mean, a lot of the Pender public was still perceiving it as memories at the end. So there was still that kind of, getting your feet wet part. So the first season was really just survival, getting through the summer. And then by September, October, we crashed. Like the restaurant, we kind of built this model to be really busy. And then like literally after Labor Day, the business died down. Then it became a new reality. There's kind of like a new learning curve of the restaurant business on Pender very quickly. So we kind of opened up with a bang. And even the lodging, I mean, I'd not operated a hotel before. And so, operating a restaurant, trying to build that business, and then being in the lodging business all of a sudden, like within a very tight time period.
Yeah. Okay. So what are you thinking at this time? Because you said that your friends in Vancouver were thinking you were crazy for doing this. Like, what's going through your head after this first year's almost over, I guess, at this point?
I mean, I conceptualized it. I was pretty certain where I was going to end up. I mean, I did the video within a week or two of flying here and looking at the property. If you look at the video today, it's pretty much what it is today. Like the video I did in whatever it was, August 2014 versus 2023 is virtually the same. Like the vibe and the concept is really not different than it was then. So that vision, you're just literally surviving. You're trying to I got people coming, arriving, and guests checking in. We got mess, like things aren't done properly. You're trying to adjust. So I'd never really operated a business I did business and I was in business and I did deals and I owned businesses, but I didn't have employees. I wasn't like operating waiters and house cleaners and I, have experience in the hotel business, but you do a job. You're a bartender, you're cooking in a kitchen. Those are jobs, not running the whole hotel.
Yeah.
So I'm learning as I'm going along with everything. It was just all with a macro vision of where I wanted to end up, but it was messy. Like it's just messy. You literally get up in the morning, you work all day, like from morning till night, and you're just dealing with crisis all day. You're dealing with like what's in your face, trying to keep the deliverables high at a high level. But it's not like it's your 10th deal and this is like easy because you've done it before. This is all new, pretty new. Even though I'd done all the components before, I knew how to do accounting. I knew how to do bartending, I knew how to cook, but all of a sudden you're doing all of it all at once and managing people, which I'd never really done in my career. So okay. Well,
this is interesting. What I'm going to do here is we're going to hit the pause button on Pender at the moment, and we're going to go back to different points in your life because you brought up a couple things that I want to touch on. So you talked about being involved in the real estate industry and also being involved in the restaurant and service industry. So maybe to give a little bit of background about your involvement in doing deals and being involved in real estate, if you could explain to myself and the listeners a little bit about how you got involved in that and your experiences there.
So I grew up in like 14 years old, working in kind of restaurants, hotels, some family businesses. So I'd been involved in the food and restaurant business and hotel business from 14 years old all the way through. My mother also owned a grocery store. So I grew up from like 8 years old till 13, 14. She had a health food store. She was a naturopath. So she fed cancer patients, put them on pH balance 7 diets, supplied all their food. So I kind of grew up in the food genre, from very young, like 8 years old. And she was always talked to me like an adult. My siblings were older. So by the time I grew up at 8 to 13 years old, I was pretty much like an only child. And my mother worked. So I went to work with her. So I basically was stocking shelves, marking groceries, doing all that kind of stuff at an early age.
Wow.
stocking going to the wholesaler, buying the candy, chocolate bars, kind of involved in commerce and also health food. So my mother was a naturopath. So we ate, organic farm food all my life. Like that's all I was exposed to. So the idea of, sourcing local farm, fresh food, organic, eating healthy, cooking with grapeseed oil rather than olive oil, all those kinds of things that I do now, I learned in that genre. And then by about 14, I started working in restaurants. Like I had a job at a restaurant, bussing tables at 14. And then I started cooking by about 15, 16. I was in the kitchen, got thrown in the kitchen because the chef walked out at 7 p.m. with 50 people in the restaurant. So that's how I learned how to cook. I got literally thrown in. It was a dining room. So we did, steaks, lobster, kind of old style Canadian fine dining. And then I worked pretty much all of my jobs were food related all the way through till, Edmonton Convention Center, the West End, the Four Seasons. And then I moved to Vancouver when I was 20 to be the bar manager at the Pan Pacific, worked at the Bayshore for a few months before that. And then I guess 21, 22, I worked through Expo till September. I got accepted to BCIT to take their real estate program.
Okay.
In September of that year. So that would be 86. And then, so by September I was in school, but then I bartended. So I gave up the bar manager job, became a bartender at the Pan Pacific. And then I worked through school at the Pan Pacific, got a real estate, I guess dip tech at the time, and then went into the real estate business. So I got hired out of school. I went into commercial real estate business. Mm-hmm. So 88 for a small boutique firm, Bruno and Associates. And then I worked up until 94 for them. 94, we started our own company. So 4 guys from Bruno split off and we started our own real estate company, our own commercial real estate company. Not long after that, I started doing deals, investment deals, started buying buildings. And then eventually started getting into the retail business side of the business as a broker. So I kind of did the investment side and then I became a retail rep. So I started doing Aritzia like 93, 94 when I started my company. I started also doing Aritzia, and their family also did Hills of Kerrisdale and Blue Ruby almost at the same time. So I kind of had 2 businesses. I did the retail rollouts and then I did my own investment deals, which I did all the way through the 90s. So I kind of had 2 things that I did.
Okay, this is sounding like a lot of life experience here. I want to actually just slow down and pull it back to the time in the beginning there with your mother is like stocking the shelves a little bit, because we actually talked about this a couple months ago, and you went into depth talking about your experience in the restaurant industry. But I didn't actually know that was your childhood experience growing up with that particular situation. But that sounds pretty great, like having a mom who was a naturopath who really spent a lot of time in preparing really healthy, wholesome, organic food for you.
Well, she sourced, so all these cancer patients went on Leotril. It was an experimental drug that came across from Mexico to Texas. And then you would pH balance your entire diet to 7 and then eat nothing that created toxicity in your body. So anything that your body would consider a carcinogen, like cooking olive oil, which becomes hypermolecular and becomes toxic to your body. So anything that your body would have to fight off, we eliminated, or she eliminated. So all your foods were supernatural, no impurities, no chemicals, in order for your body to be relaxed and able to fight off the cancer. So, and in addition, so pH balance 7, so the cancer survives on acidic or alkaline. It has to be out of balance. That's when it sort of starts to grow and multiply. So you kind of take away that ability for cancer to thrive, almost like parasites. You take away the sugar and things that they eat. And then in addition to that, they would be on this experimental Leotril drug, which was kind of one of the first cancer drugs. And it was experimental, so it had to be brought in through Mexico. It was kind of a bit controversial. And she had huge success stories. One woman was stage 4 cancer, about to, months to live for 14, 15 more years. So anyways, that was kind of her grocery store, health food store. And we had families that would buy all their groceries with us. It's kind of like a country store.
And where was this exactly?
Just by Leduc, Alberta.
Okay.
So it's kind of like a Southridge kind of store,
Yeah.
similar to that.
And so when you were a kid having that experience, because it's interesting to think like my experience as a kid growing up was in the suburbs, and my parents got really busy working a lot, and I would eat a lot of fast food. But it sounds like that was a completely opposite experience. That like, did you have any interest in like foods like that, or because you were?
We had chocolate bars, pop, cigarettes. I didn't drink pop. And I owned the candy counter, and I owned, like, my mother would give me, and I would go to the wholesaler and kind of stock the candy counter and the chocolate bars.
Yeah.
And she kind of bought me some, and then I leveraged it. And so that was actually my business, but I never ate chocolate bars and I never drank pop.
Wow.
I just never grew up with it. It was just like, I never ate white sugar until I started cooking and baking. I cooked with a French chef. I started cooking in a kitchen. And I was making Bavarian mousse cakes and flans and sacher torts. So I actually got sick because I had never eaten that much sugar. And you're making it, so you wind up eating it.
Yeah.
My body reacted because I'd never eaten. We'd only eaten Demerara sugar or unpasteurized honey. We ate things like fruit crisps, and we had, ice cream was probably my biggest non-naturopathic food that we ate, but I never drank pop. Hardly ever. I mean, I maybe tasted it, but I never really drank it as a regular kid. And we never ate things like Twinkies or hot dogs. All our meat was, we'd eat like top sirloins. We did eat meat, but it was all like farm meat because we would source it for people. So that's all we ate was the food we bought. So
yeah. I think that's so cool that your mom gave you an opportunity to run the candy counter and learn what it's like to start your own little business within a business at such a young age.
And she needed the help. So I think she was smart enough to know that you need to kind of interest your kid because she needed somebody to do it. And also, pretty much a single mother, even though I had 4 siblings, but they were all older and gone. So she was a business owner, working hard nonstop. So having me involved in helping her, getting me involved or getting me engaged, I guess, was probably necessary for her.
That's cool. So, that's really cool. What did you learn from that experience as a kid when you were working the candy counter? Like, what sort of lessons were you able to pull down at that age?
I mean, I guess you just get a perception of profit and loss, I guess, or like buying wholesale, selling retail. My mother was a really good retailer, so she was very perceptive. Southridge is actually I have a soft spot for Southridge because it's a lot of what I grew up with, the sourcing all the kind of cool products that consumers can relate to or interest, rather than just doing sort of Safeway store shelves selling commodities. It was always more than that. It was always like actually listening to the customers and buying B-Bell Bakery bread that comes, like literally like whole grains that are milled by B-Bell Bakery, and just the concept of all of that, which was relating to a specific customer. So, kind of merchandising and tweaking your retail mix to cater to the customer.
Yeah.
I think at a very early age, I think it's what I grew up with. That's what I was used to. She was very good at it.
That's really cool. I think that's amazing, actually. So you mentioned as well, too, that was at the age of 14 that you had your first job working in a restaurant?
Outside of family. I mean, I grew up, my father was in printing and publishing and had Bonanza restaurants and stuff. So I grew up around business my whole, like from birth, pretty much. But the first job outside of my family was at 14, I think. Also worked, I had a couple of jobs when I was 14, 15. One of them external, one of them in a family-related hotel.
Okay.
But yeah, 14, 15, I was working externally, and then all the way through till my 20s. So I went back to school.
So what did you enjoy about the restaurant industry that kept you in there for the number of years that it did?
It was one of my initial passions. So architecture, I was going to be an architect when I was 10 or 11 years old. I was like 8 to 11, 12. And then chef, I thought that I was going to be a chef like at about 12, 11 or 12, I think. So the food cooking business was kind of in my head, and architecture. Those are kind of my 2 main focuses when I was a child. And then I started working in restaurants. So, and then I got thrown in the kitchen and I started cooking. So I think it's just a industry that's easy to do when you're 13, 14, 15 years old. I can't work as a plumber. So I think it's just kind of what you do. And then I had that background of food sourcing with my mother, I guess, or being, at a grocery store. So being around food products was not foreign to me. So, and then I was pushed to front of house by 18, 19 years old. Like bosses wanted me to go front of house. And then I got swooped in with a couple key people. So I worked with a French chef for a while, which taught me a lot about cooking. And then I went front of house and I got a job at the Edmonton Convention Center when it opened and got under the wing of the banquet manager and the general manager of the convention center. Worked my head off, and they kind of almost nurtured me, and I learned a whole lot. They sort of pushed me up from porter to head waiter to head bartender, and then had always wanted to move out of Edmonton and move to Vancouver. So the boss that I had at the Edmonton Convention Center and my 3 bosses at the Westin in Edmonton moved to Vancouver to open the Pan Pacific. So he gave me the head bartender job, the bar manager job at the Pan Pacific. And I'd worked under them in Edmonton, but it wasn't open yet. So I moved here in April to Vancouver, worked at the Bayshore until the Pan Pacific opened, but knowing that I already had the job at the Pan Pacific.
So I love the idea of you saying that you learned a lot from a French chef, because I've heard this before in various places in my life, like, oh, a French chef. What are you learning from a French chef in that setting?
I mean, I was focused on French food anyways, French language, French food. So I did a ton of baking, sacre torts, Bavarian mousse cakes, flans, aspects, all the kind of classic cooking things, like cooking steaks, saucisson, like all the things that were kind of classic French was what he did. Like we made a savory pate with cognac and butter and cream and chicken livers and shallots. So I learned, that's all what I learned how to cook was shallots and cognac and all the kind of classic, like Pernod, Cassis, all those kind of classic French. Back then it was either Italian or French. Like fine dining was more focused on those 2 genres.
Okay.
Like today there's worldwide cuisine, nouveau cuisine, Noma kind of food, which was not common back then. It was either Canadian food or French or Italian restaurants. So French was kind of our version of fine dining. So, cook with a French chef would be doing meringues and all that kind of stuff would be the top end of the food spectrum. And that's who you would either hire a Swiss or a French chef to run your hotel. Back then it was like Hervé Martin was the chef at the Pan Pacific. Those are the guys you hired. They were either Swiss French, Swiss German, or French. Almost all the chefs in all the hotels were in that. Like now there's superstar Canadians and Americans and Norwegians and all over the world. But back then they were pretty much trained in the culinary schools of Switzerland or France if you were like working in a Four Seasons or a Pan Pacific. So those are the guys you work with and trained with.
When you talked about being in the kitchen and then being let out or pushed out to work in the front of house and then doing the bartending, those are 3 different situations. Which one do you think you thrived in more?
The front of house, you can make more money. If you're going to be like a general manager of a hotel, you would want to be in the front of house, either front desk or I was on the food and beverage side. But I worked for the Edmonton Convention Center was my first big job. I mean, they have dinners for 3,000 people, French service. So my first job was I was the daytime guy that did all the banquet, like all the coffee lunch programs, and ran that whole thing myself. So we had, I don't know, like 6 to 10 daytime meetings, and they'd have, coffee and pastries, and then they'd have lunch that was all kind of continental, like not table service. You just literally set up a buffet table. The banquet manager just I was like 18 years old, 19 years old. So he wanted to keep training me because I worked my head off, and, they recognize young people. They want to keep training them and moving them up because they need people to supervise, right? We'd have all these temporary people that would get hired to do a 3,000 person banquet. So somebody had to train them that was experienced. And we did French service for everybody. So like spoon and fork, literally taking a platter and serving the plates. So that was a little more technical than putting a plated plate in front of somebody.
Yeah, 3,000 people is a staggering number.
Yeah, it was like a football field, the main banquet hall. And we'd do dinners for 3,000 people, like Tina Turner concert, 3,000 people. Table service, round tables with French service, platters of food that you'd have to carry from the kitchen. And it's like a football field. So it was crazy. It was very aggressive. So he was trained at one of the best culinary hotel schools in Europe. So the general manager and the banquet manager were both British. And I kind of got under the wing of the banquet manager. So he immediately kind of pushed me to wait and then head waiter. And then I also worked with the bar department and trained as a bartender there. And then at the same time, I had a part-time job at the Westin and worked with the Pan Pacific guys, Stephen Halliday, Jan Sager, Dean Solomon. He was the banquet manager at the Westin. So I kind of worked with them part-time. And then they all three of those guys came to Vancouver to open the Pan Pacific.
And so at that point in your life, you said that you wanted to leave Edmonton. So the
I wanted to come to Vancouver specifically.
Okay. So the invite from them to say, come with us was perfect timing.
It was, yeah. I mean, I knew I could work with them, but he wanted me specifically to be the banquet beverage manager to run the bars. That was the job that he wanted me to do. And so I'd worked with all these guys directly. So they all knew who I was. So it wasn't a big stretch. And actually originally came to Vancouver because the Mandarin Hotel. So my guy that I worked with at the Edmonton Convention Center moved to Vancouver, and he was a head waiter at the Crystal Dining Room in the Mandarin Hotel. So they actually wanted me to come and work for them. So I flew out, did an interview, gave my notice to quit my job. And a week into it, they pulled the plug because they were overruled by the food and beverage manager, which is a long story, but he, for some reason, didn't like something, even though I was heavily qualified, and the maitre d' and the head waiter both wanted me to work directly with them. So should have been a slam dunk. So they actually did me a favor and I didn't get hired there, but I'd already given my 2 weeks notice. So I moved to Vancouver with no job, basically, knowing that the Pan Pacific was ultimately a job, but that was 9 months down the road because I moved in April and Pan Pacific wasn't open till January of 86.
Okay.
So I went to the Bayshore on Monday. I got here Sunday, packed up my car Friday, drove to Vancouver, arrived on Sunday. Monday morning, went to the Westin Bayshore and started on Tuesday. So I lost 1 day of work. And I worked in the restaurant there for 9 or whatever, from April till December, and then started the Pan Pacific as soon as they were ready to open.
How was that experience? Because I don't specifically remember myself, but I kind of imagine the Pan Pacific opening in Vancouver was a big deal.
It was the best hotel in Western Canada, like best hotel in Vancouver, like highest end hotel, Japanese owned, like the 5 Sales. They had a Japanese restaurant that was third party, but like high end sushi. So it was like the highest end sushi Japanese restaurant in Vancouver at the time. And then they had the 5 Sales, which was classic French. And Hervé Martin, French chef, was running the hotel. They had a really good team of people. And Stephen Halliday ran the Westin, worked for the Westin, was the general manager of the Westin in Edmonton. So he had a lot of pedigree, and Jan Sager was this great guy. So they had a great management team. 5 Sales was like the best restaurant in Vancouver. And then this high-end Japanese. And then the rooms were beautiful, bird's eye maple at the time. They spent the most per room of any hotel ever at the time.
Wow.
I think in North America, like whatever, I can't remember what it was, $250,000 a room or something. Crazy amount of money. And then it was also opening during Expo. So Canada Pavilion, it was an epic opening. That whole year was crazy. Like all the dignitaries, Nakasone, and then we did the Commonwealth Conference. It was all headquartered. Pan Pacific was kind of the epicenter of all of Expo. Like everybody who was anybody stayed there. The Sultan of Brunei, so it was kind of like a once in a lifetime period of time for the Pan Pacific, which is, it's kind of tragic to go there today and stay there because it still looks the same as it did in 1986. And in 86, it was the top hotel in Western Canada, and now it's this tragic kind of hasn't been updated. It's kind of weird.
So what was that like in that first year with all that excitement going on? How did that feel for you? Because were you
great for me because I was the head bar, the bar manager. So I did all the head tables, and then I went back to school. And because I had supervisory experience or was the bar manager, so whenever I would come back and work on the weekends, I'd get to work like either private functions. It was great. Like I served Margaret Thatcher, Dennis Thatcher, Mulrooney, all the dignitaries. I did the Nakasone Bennett Summit. There was one Canadian, which was me, and one Japanese guy that did the Japanese side. So we rehearsed for 2 days and did all that. I served Princess Di, Prince Charles. It was crazy. It was a crazy period of time. And because of who I was or what I was trained to do, I did all those head tables. So it was kind of pretty once in a lifetime. And I guess it's in the service industry, it's easy to dumb it down. So working at the best, you can't make mistakes, right? You're serving Mulrooney and he's looking at you with hawk eyes, and like you have to be perfect. Otherwise you can't talk too much. You have to, serve the wine with one finger. Like you just have to do everything. You can't drop wine on the table. Like you just can't make mistakes. So it's easy to dumb it down, I think. So I was lucky my start in the service industry was kind of emphatic.
Did you see a lot of people crumble under that kind of pressure around you, or they got weeded out very quickly?
I think back in the day, like when I came here to work at the Bayshore, hotels had older people that had worked there as career waiters, career bartenders. Mm-hmm. So I think the overall quality, like people had tenure back then. It was just in Europe in January, and the service people there were more like they were back when I started. Today, they're like people are actors working in restaurants. They're not really serious about it as much as they were. Even if you go to a Four Seasons today, the service quality is more temporary. It's not like it was before. So back then, people were like at the Bayshore, they had women that had worked there 25 years. They were going to retire at the Bayshore. So people had careers as bartenders and waiters back then. Doormen were, 50 years old. Today, it's not like that. It's much more of it's harder to get staff. Those career people have retired and they've been replaced with young people. So I don't think the quality is the same. But in Europe, people had way more knowledge about, here in Vancouver, you go to the high-end restaurants, the quality of the staff is much better because you can make more money. So they attract the best of the industry, and we've got great people, but in general, the overall service quality is less than it used to be, I think.
Well, What was the camaraderie like between staff members? Because if they'd been working together for so long, I guess that there obviously wasn't a high turnover rate, clearly, right?
Pan Pacific was new, though, so it was non-unionized and new. So Bayshore was unionized, and it had all that tenure of people that had worked there a long time. Pan Pacific was brand new, so all of us were new. So nobody had worked at the Pan Pacific because it was like literally opened in January and we all worked there. But the quality of the staff was good because it was a new, sexy hotel. So, pretty much we had a lot of pretty good staff, I think. The management team was very strong. But again, the deliverables were different than they are now. Like the bar program today, to being a top cocktail, a bartender today or mixologist is way more intense than it used to be. Like the level of complexity on the bar. Like back then you'd make Caesars and vodka tonics and you'd make some mixed drinks, but your menu is much more predictable than it is today. Today you're making your own bitters. It's like much more complicated. Even the coffee program today, so there's parts of the industry that are much more complex and specific. Even cooking now is much more, technical. The equipment, combi ovens, all the kind of, and sous vides and it's different now than it was back then. It's more like French food, cooking in a copper pan with butter. Like it was just different than it is now.
You mentioned as well too that you were going to school during this time. What made you decide that you wanted to go to school?
It was pretty much in my head all the way through. I started at university in Alberta, and then I just decided to work. So I kind of dropped out, and then I pretty much figured out by 1920 that, I looked at Stephen Halliday's salary. working his entire life to get to be the general manager of the Pan Pacific, and kind of looked at how long it would take to get to that level. There's a big gap. So in the beginning of the service industry, so the waiters in a hotel or the bartenders in a hotel would make actually more money than the supervisors. So I kind of looked at the industry thinking, once I get out of my hourly wage, so working the way I was working, I was getting paid for every hour I worked, and I'd get overtime, and then I'd get tips. And I was probably making $30 an hour at 20 or 19, 20 years old. But I looked at my next levels of where I would go, and I knew I would go back to school and do something. So initially I was going to go work for my mother's family in Texas. I thought of that. So I enrolled in an industrial marketing course at BCIT to go work for them potentially. And then it got canceled. So I flipped into real estate, and then that was it.
Okay. So what made you choose real estate?
It was kind of accidental. They literally canceled the industrial marketing program.
Okay.
And after getting accepted, enrolled, and then making all the plans to do that, my family were all coming out for Expo. So they were all here staying at the Pan Pacific. Initially, real estate wasn't what I was going to get. It actually flipped into it. Literally, by September, they canceled the program, and I was in real estate. They gave me a choice, what do you want to flip into? There was 5 choices. So I picked real estate, went back to school, didn't really understand where I would end up at the beginning of the program. Your real estate part is the second year. So first year is marketing, just like a regular course. Everybody takes it. So everybody's in the same course for the first year. And then the second year is your specialty. But I really didn't know that I was going to be in commercial real estate at that point. And then you start learning your options, I guess, as you go in. And by the time I was in my second year, then you're starting to look at, you do an apprenticeship. We did it with Colliers. So we did a industrial map for Colliers. This is historical. Every year, BCIT or UBC students do these internships with companies that they want to get into. So eventually we're going to be we're graduating with a real estate dip tech, marketing real estate. So you get a directed studies job, not paid, with a company that you're going to ultimately maybe work for. Colliers would hire or would bring in these students. So there was 3 of us, and we went to Colliers offices and did a map for them, an industrial map. So we literally drove the Lower Mainland and mapped out all the industrial parks. So they have a industrial map, and so our job was to take the map and update it to what it is today. So we literally had to do all of the industrial areas in the Lower Mainland and update the map. So we had to literally drive around and interview and do there's a lot of work to do, and this is part of our course. It was a course, one of our credits. One of the 3 actually worked for Colliers. I got another job at Bruno, but all of us got hired out of school, pretty much pre-hired. By the time you're graduated, you've already been hired.
Okay. Well, no, I've never heard of Colliers or Bruno before. I don't know what business they're actually
Colliers is like a worldwide, huge real estate company all over the world.
Okay. All right.
Bruno was a 7 salesmen plus Von Bruno. Von Bruno was this iconic commercial real estate guy. He never made less than $1 million in commissions from 1974. I started working for him in 88. Never less than $1 million, $1 to $2 million in commissions.
Whoa.
He used to be the president of Knowlton's, which was an iconic real estate company. All boutique, top producers. So there was 7 older guys that had lots of experience. So it was a boutique firm versus Colliers that had, 200 employees. So one of the guys that was my friend that we graduated with, you pick your directed studies team. So they're all of us hung out together. So we all went to Colliers, did the project. One of them eventually, he now runs a development company, but he became a VP of Colliers at one point. So he got hired by the same company. We all got job offers from them, but only one of us chose them. I wanted a more boutique firm. I thought it was more hands-on, which it was, versus working at a huge company where you become a micro player. At Bruno, you can kind of pick your spot. And I worked with a senior sales manager guy as his direct assistant.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of wanted that versus working in a huge company.
Because are you looking down the road at that point thinking, okay, well, if I'm able to have more of a hands-on experience in a smaller company, I'm going to be able to excel more later on through your career?
And also Von Bruno. So his daughter actually graduated with me, Michelle Bruno. He was iconic. Like he was the top producing guy. Colliers actually ultimately had a guy at the same time, Avtar Baines, who became like the top realtor in Canada. But it was a huge company. So to me, I wanted more intimate, hands-on work. And I picked it based on the guy I was working with. I was working with one guy, whereas at Colliers, you could work as an assistant to the industrial team or the office team. It's more, you're in a big bunch of cubicles with a whole bunch of guys versus Bruno, which was, I worked with the sales manager guy directly with him, learned way more. So that was my perception. And it was also the reality that I literally was his assistant. I wrote all his contracts. He threw me into the wolves, I was like hands-on right from the start, doing his deals with him. He was a sales guy. So we were selling Granville Street, all downtown South. We sold like 12 buildings in the first year, and I would write the contracts. Versus Colliers, where you're a gopher kind of running around being an assistant. This was like literally working directly with a guy, doing deals with him.
Okay. So you're selling commercial real estate, or is it residential as well too?
Commercial,
or?
No, only commercial.
All right. And so at this point, I guess you've totally put the restaurant side of things on the back burner, and you're
Yeah, I tried to work at the Pan Pacific a little bit while I was working there in the beginning because they don't pay you a lot. They pay you like $1,000 a month for 12 months while you're an assistant.
Okay.
So I had a cleaning contract. I tried to bartend. It just got too much because I was working too much at the $1,000 a month job. So. And it's your career, so it's your future career. So I eventually had to quit bartending. I bartended all the way through school, and then probably the first 6 months of that job, and then I just couldn't anymore. I had to give it up. So then I was out of the food and beverage industry. But then I started doing restaurant deals. I started doing Yaletown, Gastown, kind of as a broker. So I was still kind of a little bit in the restaurant business as a broker, leasing space to restaurants and stuff, but.
So as the years are going by and you're doing this, are you enjoying the work? Are you getting a lot of benefit out of this personally from it in terms of excitement and value of doing the work?
Yeah, I mean, I picked a occupation where your outcome is based on your effort. So, I mean, you're somewhat limited in the hotel business because if I work 3 times harder than the other guy, I'm still making the same amount of money. So the commercial real estate, the smarter you are, the harder you work, the more opportunities. You're going to get commissions based on the deals you do. It's 100% commission. So once you get out on your own and you're finished your assistant's gig, you're literally like no income. So you have to manifest everything yourself.
Yeah. You
have to get the listing, you have to sell the listing or lease the listing in order to make a commission and put it all together. So you're running your own business. So that's the platform that I intentionally put myself in, but I picked Bruno because it was hands-on. I was going to learn more about the industry. And then because working with all these senior guys, they were just like really smart. Like I literally there's 7 guys plus him. So they're like, you're really in the middle of like kind of like working for a micro investment bank versus a huge company.
So I don't know anything about commercial real estate, and this is really interesting to me. So can you explain a bit of the ins and the outs about how this works? Like, how does working smarter exactly play out in a real life scenario in terms of that?
In commercial real estate, you have kind of, unless you're a senior guy and you get a job as a commercial realtor and you've been in business for a while, but generally coming up as a young person, you either have to go to BCIT and get the dip tech in real estate, or you go to urban land economics at UBC. Those are the 2 options to get a job. So all of us pretty much have a degree in real estate, and that's how you get hired. And then you work as an assistant for 1 year to train, 6 months to 12 months. And then you are on your own. It's 100% commission. So you have to manifest. So depending on where your office is, so our office was in downtown Vancouver. Bruno is known for office leasing. So we really did a lot of downtown Vancouver stuff. We weren't an industrial firm, so we didn't do like Colliers has a big industrial division. So they're doing like Tilbury and, Annacis Island and all kinds of stuff, which actually I had exposure to because we did the industrial map for Colliers. So I knew about all those areas, but our focus was pretty much the downtown core, which is what I ultimately did. I started as a young person breaking in. I was able to get into the downtown South, Yaletown, and Gastown markets, and I became kind of the guy. I did like half the deals there. That's how once I went on my own, because Anson did sales in the downtown core. So we did we sold like 4 buildings on Granville Street, and that downtown South area was getting rezoned. It used to be all nightclubs, and it's all getting rezoned to high rise. So we sold a lot of buildings that were going to get redeveloped into towers. It was an emerging market. It got rezoned by the city and densified. So I started doing Yaletown. I really was attracted to heritage and architecture always, like right from a young child. So Yaletown, Gastown were funkier deals, cooler buildings. And then I just got into them, and I like literally had 12 buildings listed. So a lot of leasing and then a little bit of sales. But I became kind of the dominant Yaletown, Gastown guy, did most of the deals there. So that was kind of my shtick. And you have a bunch of signs. So I've got, leasing signs everywhere. So tons of calls, tons of tours. So I was just like running like crazy from 88 to 94 when we started our company doing Yaletown, Gastown deals. That was kind of my thing.
Okay. So what did a typical day look like in terms of what you were doing and the amount of hours that you're putting in per day during those years?
Just because I had a lot of small listings, a lot of buildings, like the Yaletown buildings. So you had 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 square feet, tons of tours, tons of calls, versus selling a shopping center where you're dealing with investors and there's less calls because there's no sign outside a shopping center. You're doing more direct marketing to people that have $20 million to buy a shopping center. I was doing deals with restaurants and, small offices, startup businesses. So tons of volume leasing up these buildings. I'd have 30, 40 spaces and I'd get, 20 calls a day. I was constantly running in and out in my car doing tours, but they're all in the downtown core. So they're all in, I was like literally commercial plate, parking and loading docks, running like 1,000 miles an hour nonstop, doing tons of deals, but you don't make as much per deal. So you're, 1,000 square feet, you're making $2,000, $3,000 versus doing a big deal where you're making a big commission. So I don't know, it's just typical day is nonstop. Like you're in the office by 7 or 8 and you're leaving it. I worked longer than the other guys. The other guys were older, so I'd work 12-hour days probably.
When you're looking back on that time, what do you reflect on as like an aspect of it that you really enjoy and you miss from those times?
It was fun. I mean, in 94, when we started our own company, that was pretty exciting. I was 30 and we were 4 guys. I'd never had my own company before, so that was pretty exciting. I think the whole 90s, like especially from about 93, 94 through that period was pretty exciting. 5-year period. But I think I look back, I think part of the angst that I had back then, and it was a lot of angst. I was pretty much singularly focused on career and business. I wouldn't want to go back to that personal stage of my life so much, but it was exciting from a business point of view. I mean, you're a young person and you're trying to conquer the world. I think I was doing it for the wrong reasons, but, family acceptance, trying to, be the next billionaire by the time I was 40, like working my head off, taking, lots of calculated risks just to be successful. Like, I don't think I was doing it for the right reasons necessarily. I don't know. It just is what it is, right? But I don't think I was doing it necessarily for a deep-rooted emotional reason. I think I was doing it because that's what I was trained to do as a family, genetically, or was to work, right? So,
well, can you tell me a bit about that? Like, because what was your family? You mentioned that your family was involved in business in Texas, and so maybe to give a little more shape and clarity to that.
All of my family are in business, so 3-generation, grandfather, uncles, father, mother, siblings, all were self-employed. Pretty much is kind of what we do. Not as much. I mean, I have some that are maybe lawyers or politicians, but generally they're business owners. Kind of what we do. My mother's family, Texas, like they're in business. My father was in business. My brothers were in business. My mother was in business. So I was trained to be in business, I guess, ultimately. So commercial real estate was kind of like having your own business. And then we actually started our own commercial real estate company. So when I say I was trained to do it, that's pretty much my life. Like it was, I think I had good training to be a business person. I'm not sure I had a lot of personal balance training. So, which I think Pender ultimately was kind of a metamorphosis or a change in my life. I think when I moved to Pender, a little more complete life, even though I work nonstop, which I always have. From a personal connection point of view, like less barriers, less boxes. Pender was kind of like a big change in that part of my life, I think. Back then I lived in boxes, so I was very calculated, very emphatic about each box being separate from the other, which was a lot of work, right? It's a lot of work to be that intentful on being successful and also guarding parts of your life, like not exposing who you are, really. So constantly being calculated with everything you do. So it was hard work during that period. Also lots of success, but I think I didn't necessarily do it for all the right reasons, I guess, because it wasn't connected, wasn't holistic.
Well, thanks for sharing that. That's really insightful. And I want to slowly meander back to Pender here, but before we get there, I think that it's interesting to tie this off a little bit. So with the starting of your own business in 94 and doing that and the excitement, how did that wind up evolving for you as the years went by before you got to Pender?
Well, that first company was young and exciting. And then by 98, the market was crashing and I had got involved in a lot of investment deals and got caught up in a bad deal. So 94 to 98 was like crazy successful, crazy growth period, working my head off, very intentful to kind of get to the top, and then came crashing down. I just did I did a deal that I never should have done. Wouldn't have advised myself to do it. If I was asking myself as a broker, would you do this deal? I would have told you you're crazy, don't do it. And I closed it and I did it, and it wound up sort of catapulting a whole sort of chain of events from 98 to 2000 that personally and business wise that created a lot of disheveledness, I guess. So that wasn't a good period of time. 2000, I had given up that company. So I basically moved away. It was a partnership anyway. So my partner took it over by then. And then I moved on, basically sold off all of my real estate. I had a bunch of stuff in Alberta from 98 to 2000, had gotten rid of most of it. And then 2000, I was basically not doing anything. It wasn't, my whole sort of investment business that I had done was not happening at the moment. And so a guy, Aritzia actually, his best friend, worked for Avis and Young, a commercial real estate company, had a huge TELUS contract. And they needed a retail guy because I'd always done Aritzia and Blue Ruby and all those other guys. So he hired me to go to Avison to run the TELUS account, all the retail for Canada on my own. So that became a 6-year job. So it changed everything I did. I gave up my company and worked for Avison for 6 years. And I did all the repositioning of TELUS Mobility. So we merged all those companies when they had bought all the phone companies. They bought Quebectel, ClearNet, TELUS and BCTEL merged. I created a national retail platform for them, integrated all of their 900 retail locations in the West, and then coordinated that with corporate stores in Toronto, the ClearNet guys. So that was a huge project. Closed all the phone stores for TELUS. They had all the BCTEL phone stores. I closed all those. We had a budget, went through and negotiated all the terminations. And then for 6 years, there was a dealer network in the West, 900 locations with all these like Tom Harris Cellular and all these. So we took back all the A real estate. We took back all the mall locations, all the A street front, head leased them from TELUS and then subleased back to the dealer. And then everything was a TELUS store. So we centrally designed all the stores, including dealer stores. So they all look like TELUS stores. Mm-hmm. So it was a massive job for 6 years. So that became my focus. And I did the other stuff for Aritzia and stuff on the side. So that took me through till like 2006, 2007. And then just kept doing retail stuff. So I added more retail clients, sort of 6, 7. I went back on my own again. So I worked from home at Corville Group. So my company now that kind of operates in conjunction with Pender Island Resorts that sort of got more active. So then in the 2013, 14, I just got bored with it all. Like, so from 2006, well, actually 2000, when I did the tele stuff, all the way through to 2014, I had done all these retail deals. Like, I was Mr. Retail. So
what do you mean by Mr. Retail? Like buying and selling retail places?
I did like Telus Mobility, Aritzia, Blue Ruby, Max Mara, Campo Marzio. I had like a chain of, or like a group of retail clients, and I negotiated all of their deals across the country.
So for leasing,
yeah, like I did all the Aritzia deals for 22 years. So every deal that Aritzia has, physical store deal they've done in Canada, I did them from 1993 till 2015.
Okay.
Every deal they did, I negotiated them. They had a real estate department, but I negotiated them, found the location, negotiated the terms for every deal they did. And Blue Ruby and Max Mara, we did a repositioning with them. So that's what I did all the way up till Pender. But it was getting boring. Like Aritzia had a big real estate department by then. They had a VP of, like, it was no longer me doing all the deals from start to finish. It was now, I was kind of the guy that beat up on landlords to bring it across the threshold, but then they had a whole lease administration department. Like it was more corporate and less hands-on. We used to bang out the deals. Like Brian and I used to bang out the deals in the beginning. Now he's like not even the CEO anymore. He's moved on. It's like a multi-billion-dollar company.
Oh, really? Okay. So 2014 comes and so you're getting bored with this because it's been 14 years of.
Yeah, that was that beginning of 14, and then going to a family function in Texas and talking. Like I was trying to explore ideas of what I was going to do, and I needed an active business. So versus an investment business, like buying a building, it's an investment. It's a hands-off investment. So the taxation is like 45%. I needed an active business to replace my retail consulting business. So something that would, like a mini storage or a resort, are both active businesses. So I can operate them, but also have an investment side behind it.
Okay.
Whereas doing Aritzia deals, I make a commission and I move on. There's no equity in it. So I wanted to kind of combine the two into one project. So that was kind of the intent of it. And also change. I was like, I've been in Vancouver for a long time. So it was like, I wasn't adverse to moving to New York or somewhere completely different and doing a project that was not Vancouver, doing what I did. And also just kind of, I don't know, just change. I wanted some change. And then it just culminated to looking all over, like everywhere, going to New York for a mini storage conference, to eventually coming to the Gulf Islands, looking at Tofino, looking at Parksville. And then it just literally by fluke flew to Pender. I didn't even know I didn't really even know where Pender Island was coming from Vancouver. I mean, I knew Victoria, I knew Salt Spring, I knew Galliano, kind of, but I'd never been to Galliano other than on a boat. So I think I actually came to Pender when I was young in university. We used to boat a lot. So I'm pretty sure we went to Poets Cove, Browning, but I don't remember that specifically. So I literally flew here for the first time, never seen it. Greg Rowland was my agent that I'd contacted. I saw it online, the On Pender listed, and I saw Browning was listed with LandQuest or something. So that was the intention of coming to Pender, was look at those two properties. And the only reason I wound up on Pender is because of that property.
Okay.
Not because I didn't even know where Pender was, really.
So as you're doing all this exploration throughout the province and seeing these different locations, are you getting more and more excited about the possibility of moving away from Vancouver and being in more of a rural setting? Or
I didn't. It was literally project specific, which it is in the kind of industry that I was in. We're deal specific, so I wasn't adverse to anything. Like I wasn't intentionally. It wasn't a personal thing, so it was more of it was a personal project, but I was literally wanting to do a project, and wherever that project led me to, I was open to. The moving part wasn't the reason I was doing it. It was the project specific. I wanted a deal to put together to combine the active business with the real estate. I wanted to have the two combined in my next genre. So rather than just doing consulting, which, because I kind of spent my career in the investment business and the brokerage business. So I kind of wanted to bring the two together. And hospitality was my background, but it wasn't my first intent. My first intent, I was looking at other deals like mini storage and just family business. Like I was just exploring ideas like you do when you want to change and you just want to do something different.
Yeah. This is so interesting. This is amazing. This is such incredible context for your journey to how you got here. I appreciate all these bits of your life that you're sharing. The one thing I want to make sure that I get to, though, is that you talked about at a certain point in your life, things were in boxes and they were separated. And you mentioned before that coming to Pender, that changed a bit, that you were able to, I don't remember the term that you used, but like sort of like have more of a holistic, integrated experience with being here and more of a balance in your life.
Yeah, well, I can be who I am, both personally and business. There's no separation between the two where there used to be. Like, I never combined my personal life with my business life other than my partners. So Stephen, who I've been working with since 1990 at Bruno, we started Paradigm together in 94. So we're still investment partners together in a company. So we've been partners for 33 years. He knows everything about, I know his kids. His kids were born when we were like working together. I know his wife. I know everything about him, but in external business with clients, I'd never combined business with my personal life ever. And then in Pender, it's just, I'm fully exposed. Like the separation of business and personal is like, I live there. I'm part of it. I'm running it. It's who you are. It's how you're defined. Your name's all over social media. It's like you're fully vulnerable to who you are. Everybody kind of knows who you are. They knows about your personal life. Before, I would never do that. I would always have a wall between my personal life and my business life. We're completely separate.
Yeah. So how did you find that initially once you started to realize that was happening? Like, was there a sense of discomfort that came or did it gradually?
I don't know. Pender has like an accepting, I think it's changing now a little bit with the new demographic. I don't think it's a lot changed, but I think the original exposure I had to Pender was quite unique. It's a conservative population, older population, but it's very liberal. There's like a thing about Pender that's very specific. I don't think Salt Spring's like that. I don't think Vancouver Island's like that. Vancouver's not like that. Like you look at, say, a blue collar worker on Pender versus a blue collar worker in the Lower Mainland are completely different. Like here, there's a non-phobic kind of like accepting way of Pender that's very unique, I think, to Pender that I experienced. I think that I haven't seen in other markets or other areas that I've lived in, I think. That was kind of the magic of Pender, I think, that to me was different. It was different. It was a different experience than I was expecting in a market that's, average age 59 with, and the population is very conservative from an aspirational point of view, like the type of food they like. It's an older blue collar kind of market predominantly, right? Like Magic Lake, there's a lot of people and that's like similar to Langford or Langley, but they're completely different markets. Like here, it's completely like people were kind of more cohesive, less phobic. So they're liberal from a social point of view, but not necessarily from an aspirational sort of customer point of view for, like kind of eggs that you like to eat, but which was more Canadian kind of typical. So anyways, that was kind of my experience when I came to Pender. So it was, and you're also operating a business and you're front and center to the public, which I'd never done before. I'm used to dealing with CEOs or, mall guys or something, but not general public.
Right.
Like I didn't even deal with employees really. I was a negotiator. So I was the frontline guy that, went and beat up with Cadillac Fairview and Aritzia was my client versus the employees of Aritzia were not my client. I didn't work with them. I just worked with senior VPs. So that was kind of my genre. Now I'm dealing with, trying to hire dishwashers and on the ground micro stuff, so it's kind of like a whole different occupation for me.
Yeah, totally. Well, what you're saying about the kind of person that lives on Pender, and I was just kind of thinking about it because you first mentioned it was a busy day today, lots of tradespeople coming, right? And like we have a lot of tradespeople living on the island, and they're all really pretty great guys, really,
It's quite different. So we have contractors that stay with us all the time, and they're loud, and saying swear words against women that are sitting in the room next door. Like there's a crassness typically to that stays in my motel all the time, and they're not Pender guys. Like the Pender guys are completely different. So it's kind of weird that Pender, and across the board, it's a pretty liberal, which is odd because we're typical Canadian, like where it's very white. It's very like typical Canadian kind of demographic that live here, and they all come and stay in the motel, and they're future retirees that are 50 years old plus. They literally come to look at real estate on Pender and stay in my motel. So I see pretty much all these new people that come. I see them or meet them at some point. And they're all kind of like typical Langley suburban kind of people, but there's a different mentality. I don't know whether you adapt it when you come here, but because if you go to those areas, and the contractors that come and stay with us, like I have to sometimes go down and tell them to shut up because there's two women next to you and you're talking about, like something that's inappropriate.
Sure. Yeah.
That's just not cool. But I mean, all the guys that work for me that are local would never do that. They would never. I mean, maybe they would. I don't know.
Well, no, and I think this is really interesting because the question that you asked is, does Pender change you? Do you adapt to it as you come to the island, right? And I think you kind of do, because I can remember going to Vancouver at certain points. I grew up in Vancouver, and so I go back to visit my family, and that I make eye contact with people when I'm back in the city. I'll try to strike up a conversation with somebody on the SkyTrain, but after a few days, that goes away. And I'm like, oh, right, this is how everybody's behaving. This is kind of weird, and people are a little bit uncomfortable. So then I stop, and I become a person who's silent on the SkyTrain like everybody else. So I think that when people move here, they do adapt to the tone of and the flavor of the island a little bit, and it does kind of change how people behave, and in quite a good way, I would suggest.
Yeah, and I noticed it a lot more when I moved here than maybe today, but maybe I don't get out as much now. Like I'm just too busy. I don't go out on Pender very much anymore. I did more when I moved here because I was going to the market and wandering around more than I do now. But I don't know. That was kind of the unique thing of Pender was it's like conservative but liberal. Like those two things coexist, which is not common, I don't think, in Canada, right? Like the conservative parts of Canada are usually also quite phobic and kind of, that sort of religious right-wing conservative values usually go together. There's aspects of that here, but I think in general, they're not that way. Like it's not that way. Like whether you're conservative from a, religious point of view, I don't think that crosses over into the phobic point of view as much here than it does in the rest of Canada or in other areas or the US.
Fair. So what did you wind up really learning about yourself in those first few years and sort of like coming to appreciate and enjoy about this new stage of life that you got into by owning this new business and integrating into the community and being back in like the service industry? What did you wind up learning about yourself in those first few years?
I think it was mostly survival first couple of years. First couple of years were quite messy. Like I had do a family deal to close the deal.
Yeah.
And that involved, and then I'm trying to refinance them out, and that was messy. And it's like the whole sort of first 15, 16 were quite messy. We had a lot of media initially. So mostly I was just trying to get through the day. Like there wasn't a lot of like the A to B was not as clear. I mean, the macro idea of creating Woods on Pender and being successful and kind of creating that sort of end game was sort of there, but literally there was so much accounting and I was like so behind in everything and scrambling around and working my head off, and we're tired, and seeing the forest and the trees was very hard. Then I eventually got a real mortgage to finance my family out, and then there was a little more clarity. But we were kind of in the first year, we were kind of in on Pender-ish. So the absorption and the kind of cash flow was kind of growing gradually. The restaurant has always been the Achilles of the thing. Like it's kind of the sex appeal, but also the most work and the least profitable. So it's always been kind of the thing that takes 60% of my time, 70% sometimes. So that's kind of continually evolved. So like first year we were like full on restaurant, and then it just, you crash and burn, you just can't. And then I took over the kitchen. Now I'm cooking in the kitchen every day. So as we go along, I think COVID hit then. So like by 19, we're pretty successful. We're pretty busy. But the tourism part was always challenging on Pender because it was still seasonal up to that point. So way more seasonal in 15 and 16 than it became. So we got, because of our success in the summer, it pushed people a little bit more into the shoulder season. So we as a resort got busier in March and April than other places on Pender, I think. So, and then 2020 hit. So I think it actually was better. I think COVID actually, 2020 ironically was the most profitable year because our costs were way down. Like, we had rebates on things and we got government help, and then our cash flow in the shoulder seasons exploded 2020, 2021. But I think, the first 15 to 19, it was really just trying to grow, trying to survive. Like, I don't think there wasn't a lot of forest in the trees. It was hard to kind of see where you're just like literally inundated nonstop. So we tried to take like more time off, like close for longer periods of time. Then COVID hit, and I think that really shook us up. 2020, like initially I thought the world was going to end because I'm in the office market in Vancouver and the resort business on Pender, and my office buildings were closed for 3 months with no cash flow. We rebated all our tenants, and my resort was closed. I thought it was going to be the end of the world.
Sure.
And then it wasn't. We've kind of pushed through in Vancouver and survived. And then I, like, over the course of the last couple of years, have really pushed to kind of, tweak and add more units. And so I think we're like, now today, it's more clear than it was in 19. Like up to 19, I think I was just trying to survive. And we're busier and busier and busier, but you're also like physically exhausted.
Yeah.
And there's not really a lot of an end game at that point. I think today there's more, kind of the restaurants being tweaked. COVID kind of allowed us to kind of push more into the coffee pastry side out of survival.
Mm-hmm.
And that's actually and the store component was added. So I think the restaurant kind of makes more sense now. That was always the problem. We just did too much. Like I did dinner 4 days a week. It's just too much, right? It's just too much to keep up with all that personally. Now I think we're in a better place with the restaurant. So today I think it's more clear than it was. I don't know whether that answers your question.
No, well, okay. So the restaurant in particular, though, right? Like going for dinner there, what I've noticed is that talking to Johnny, who I did an interview with, who people can listen to, it was a few episodes back. Johnny Cunningham, who's the chef at the restaurant there, and it's kind of amazing the amount of effort and precision and high quality ingredients that you guys use in the restaurant. And I think that the level of care that gets put into the food is quite remarkable. And maybe if you could just speak to that a little bit, because it's interesting to know what your background was, with you explaining your mom's experience being a naturopath and feeding high quality ingredients to cancer patients. And I guess that experience really followed through to what you're doing now.
Yeah. I mean, the vegan movement, to me, like being plant-based or plant-focused, healthy ingredient focused, comes natural to me. So yeah, it's definitely a big part of what we do. Like Raven Rock is kind of a strategic part of that. Wilderwood Farms now doing all our salad mixes and stuff. The idea of sourcing farm and making sure that we cook with grapeseed oil and cook like in a nurturing way, I think definitely comes from my upbringing. But again, it goes back to that service mentality versus, like, in the service industry, you've got to be service focused. So you're always trying to please your guests. I think that's a big part of what you need to be successful in the service industry, is always make sure your deliverables are there, kind of deal with, make sure people are nurtured and the tactility's there, the emotional provocation's there. That takes a lot of input. But you're also trying to survive. So we're kind of on Pender, you're kind of this matrix. You can't be sort of super intentional and go out and assert something, because you have the reality of seasons and locals that are older, and they have their own propensities, and then we have 50 guests on site. So how to kind of build a matrix of your personal time, like what you can actually achieve, staffing, personal time. So we're trying to do a lot, but it's hard on Pender because you can go and source the best ingredients in the world, but can you charge enough for it, and are you going to get enough customers to kind of make that all work? The matrix of that. So I think what we do now is we pare it all down. So we have dinner 2 nights a week, which we can achieve more. So Johnny works prep mostly for a couple of days, and then we do dinner together. I bake 5 days a week. So we can kind of deliver certain components and kind of do them well, because the focus is always on quality and ingredients. Because to me, it's all about that. Humans are driven by emotions. So your food has to have the right texture. It has to have the right sort of emotional provocation to the consumer. The person eating it has to provoke them in some way. It can't just be good. Can't just be okay. Can't just be a butter chicken that tastes like butter chicken and it's fine. Because again, that's not how I was brought up, right? Like you're always trying to push the envelope a little bit, try to do something a little better. But it's all based on service. So you kind of always want to make sure your guests are provoked and nurtured.
What do you receive from providing service to people? Like, what is it that keeps you going down that path? Because we talked about this before we started the interview, and it's very interesting to hear about how important delivering service is. But what kind of value do you receive in return from providing a lot of service to people?
I think as a business concept person, like somebody that creates something, I think manifesting it in a macro level. So you're kind of like you have an idea and you're trying to make it come to fruition. I think if you look at that, that's kind of like doing deals. So if you tell me, go get me a location and I start it and I finish it, I think the manifestation of the concept and having people being busy and being successful, I think that's part of it at a macro level. So you're like the idea that you organically create something and you're manifesting it and people are relating to it. And then there's you're overlapping that with survival. And there's kind of that, there's a thing where you have to pare it down eventually because you just can't keep delivering everything to everybody. So I think doing deals or completing or manifesting, I think is a big part of self-worth, not ego so much as I don't know how to it's different than ego. So service mentality to me is different than ego. It's more like you want people to be satisfied versus you want people to acknowledge how great you are. So it's not about that. It's more about like your achievement or your self-worth is based on your manifestation or your like the overall concept. So it's more self-sacrifice to maintain or to achieve a goal. I guess more like I'm willing to sacrifice my personal body in order to like get the outcome and the pastries out and have people relate to it and buy it and like it.
Yeah.
So you're kind of taking one for the team in a way. And then there's a point where that just it's not sustainable. But I think that's the affirmation versus ego. It's not so much an ego, but I mean, humans are still driven by ego, right? So we're still an ego component to that, but it's more about like service is the way that I describe a service mentality versus, because there's people that will say, oh, I won't do that because I'm not getting paid. So they'll just like back away and it's like, I'm working 30 hours. This is all I'm doing. This is what I'm going to pare back because that's all you're paying me for.
Yeah.
Versus over delivering to the point where you're always going to have a job, you're going to get promoted, you're going to get like there's a service mentality versus a take mentality or a sort of like a worker bee mentality, right? So,
totally. This is making a lot of sense to me. Actually, I'm hearing so many echoes in terms of how I'm perceiving this podcast more and more these days, because doing this podcast is a service to the community and service to people outside the community to listening. And I'm not getting paid to do this, right? But it makes me feel really good. And I want to provide this service because it feeds me something by doing it. And the answer that you gave, I heard so many parallels of thoughts that I've been having through my mind about doing this podcast. So that answer really resonates with me.
Yeah, I think in a karmatic universe, and the way the world works at a core level, at a human emotional level, I think is more like that. It's people just kind of get too caught up in what's in it for them. I think social media is, everything's kind of like cluttered and all about sort of dollars versus a karmatic contribution to society to kind of raise the level of human consciousness, versus like that should be for everybody's benefit, not just for your benefit, but it benefits you. So if you're raising the level of human consciousness overall in your actions of service, that's for everybody's benefit, not just yours, right? So if you can kind of create something that people really adapt to and like, and it gives them a sense of place, that's a contribution beyond your own contribution, right? So there's a point where that becomes a service rather than, ego or like a notch on your belt, or like there has to be a greater purpose. And you always have to balance that to making sure you're not taken advantage of, or you can achieve it physically and not kill yourself. So I don't know.
Constantly checking in, constantly, reanalyzing and having perspective as to, your reasons and your output, and like looking at it from many different angles, being self-reflective.
Yeah. And you can't get caught up like in a business like that. You can't, because there's so many things to do that you just have to get from A to B. You can't get caught up too much in micro-analyzing, or like you can't walk away from anything. It's just like you wake up in the morning and there's this stuff you got to do.
Yeah.
So it's less about you and more about the goal or the entity that you've created, I guess.
Fair. Well, thank you for waking up in the morning and coming over here. Holy smokes, this has been really good. Thank you, Curtis. Before we end off, though, I always want to give the guest the opportunity to share anything that they may not have had the chance to. So is there anything that we didn't talk about in this that you wanted people to know? Any last words that you want to add to anything?
Not specifically.
Well, what about for 2023? Where are things going for you for 2023? What are you looking forward towards?
Yeah, I mean, I guess you start to think it's been 8 years, I guess. 8 years. January 1st, 2015. So yeah, I don't know. I think this year is going to be similar. I think tourism patterns are going to go back to normal now. People are going to Mexico and Hawaii in the winter. So I think the reality is inflation keeps coming up, and, I can't necessarily think that we're going to be, 10 months solid busy, 90% all the time. So got to look at the future. It's going to be a kind of an interesting couple of years, I think. And again, the restaurant is kind of the biggest subjective. I think we've got a formula and a platform now that can kind of work with Johnny and Ava, and keeping it simple. I think that's probably the most subjective thing going forward. I think the lodging part of it, I think everybody's going to still want to come and hang out with a campfire. I think our deliverable is unique enough. I don't think it's going to be duplicated that easily in its like as a big resort. I think, you can do one in your backyard, but I don't think anybody can kind of do the lack of density, kind of spread out private kind of sites that we've achieved. I think so. So I don't think we're going to like crash and burn. Hopefully that we can maintain that. And I think we're pretty congruent with, like Pender and nature and forest and trees and fresh air. And I think we're kind of really dialed into that whole, like, I think Woods on Pender, having that as part of the name is appropriate. I think it fits well we're surrounded by 100 acres of forest where we are, next to a park. It's all trees if you look at an aerial. I think that's something that people want. I think that decompressing, healing, matriarchal vortex, or whatever it is that we deliver, I think as long as we don't completely screw it up, I think we'll probably still be a sustainable business. But
yeah, and giving people an opportunity to spend time in the forest, in the woods,
and
very
authentic.
healing.
To me, authenticity is really important. I think any business should be authentically what they set out to do, or what they're perceived to be. I can't, like, to me, my Achilles is lack of authenticity. I can't stand people that are like incongruent or like put on airs about what they do. and they're not authentic with it. Whatever you do, like whether you're a diner or fine dining, just be authentic, be honest about what you're doing.
Yeah. Yeah, because that comes out. We can feel it. We can sense it from people, that lack of authenticity, and it doesn't really feel good to be around, right?
And I think that's hopefully what we do, is an authentic experience.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much, Curtis. I really appreciate this.
Cool.
All right. Well, thanks to Curtis for doing that interview. And that was a lot of fun to get to do that with Curtis. These interviews are really enjoyable for me. That was the most time I've spent with Curtis for sure. And we had a great chat beforehand, as I normally do with guests. And what a pleasure. What a pleasure it was to get to know Curtis better. I hope you enjoyed that interview. And thank you for sticking around to the end of this podcast. And thank you for listening to these interviews. If people did not listen, I surely would not do these. But it sounds like more and more people are catching on to the podcast and going into the back catalog, which there are a lot of older interviews to listen to. So if you enjoyed this one and you want to hear some more, have a little scroll through the podcast page. You'll see that there are many interviews from the past, and there's a lot of good ones in there. So please enjoy those. I want to say thank you to Ben McConkey for providing the theme music for this podcast, and until next time.